It's my pleasure to welcome you to the Vrije Universiteit Brussels and its Institute for European Studies for this policy forum on cold shoulders or warm welcomes, challenges and opportunities for the EU's Arctic policy. This is an event that is organized also in the context of the Jean Monnet network GovTran, which stands for Governing the EU's Climate and Energy Transition in Turbulent Times, and receives funding from the European Commission's Jean Monnet program. It's my particular pleasure to welcome three speakers that we have this afternoon who will inform us about the latest status of the EU's Arctic policy and the prospects, I assume. And there are lots of issues to be discussed there. Aslak Bush, who actually organized this policy forum, wrote down for me that the General Affairs Council just this week, apparently, or last week, noted that it looks forward to the Commission and the High Representative updating the EU Arctic policy, right? So I assume we'll discuss that today a little bit, how that might happen and what it may entail. So the three speakers in the order in which they will actually speak are, first of all, Ambassador Marianne Konings, who was the ambassador at large for the Arctic of the EU until like a month ago or something. 1st of November. So
26 days ago.
Very fresh that she is not that anymore, but therefore is completely able and free to speak out what her thoughts are on the topic. She's a lawyer by training and previously also served as EU ambassador to Mexico and Canada, among many other things. So very warm welcome to you. And after that, it will be Dr. Andreas Østhagen from the Fridtjof Nansen Institute in Oslo, where he's a senior fellow and leadership group member at the Arctic Institute in Washington, D.C. as well, my notes say at least. So also warm welcome to you, and we're very much looking forward to your remarks. The last speaker will be Mikael Jansson, who's director for the North Sweden European Office and is currently coordinator for the Northern Sparsely Populated Areas Network. There are all kinds of networks, so this is one of them.
In Brussels.
Representing 14 regions in northern Sweden, Finland, and Norway. So he will be the last speaker, and what you can expect is that the first speaker, Ambassador Konings, will take most of the time, 25-30 minutes, and then the other two speakers about 10 minutes each, and then we'll open up for hopefully a lively discussion. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Professor, for the invitation, the introduction. Also special thanks to Aslak for having invited me. It's a pleasure to be here. Also with my two co-panelists. We have been in several panels together, and it's always a pleasure. And I particularly would like to thank the audience for being here. I had been asked mainly to share my experience, having been for 2 years and having been the very first EU Arctic ambassador, and also to give some reflections on future. And I must say that those who have heard me before the 1st of November and now, I mean before retirement now, I always have been quite free speaking. I mean, and I will continue to do so. The reason that my post had been created, besides that I suggested the creation of the post, was to give visibility to EU's Arctic policy. And why? Because the Arctic as such is not very well known. The Arctic, the image which comes to mind is mostly polar bears on ice or polar bears on melting ice. What is not known, that particularly the European Arctic is a very, it's a region, the Arctic is a whole 4 million inhabitants. We will have next the Croatian presidency. Croatia has 4 million inhabitants. So 4 million inhabitants, and particularly the European Arctic being a very lively region where you have vivid communities, cities, universities, industrial parks, and also a rich historic and cultural heritage. So This is, I would say, giving visibility. There are different Arctics. I was in Canada before EU ambassador and visited extensively the Canadian Arctic. Now, the Canadian Arctic is completely different from the European Arctic. What is also not very well known, not only the Arctic, but also that the European Union has an Arctic policy. I know there are many things who are not known what the European Union is doing. The Arctic policy is certainly one of them. And also not known that we are strongly engaged on the Arctic since many years, and I will give some examples. Now, why is the Arctic of such importance for the European Union? And why is the European Union of so much importance for the Arctic? I would say that there are mainly three reasons. In the first place, starting from an important reality, is that the European Union actually is in the Arctic. We are not like some other interested third countries. We are not nearby. If you take into account that we have 3 of our member states who are Arctic states itself, and 2 associated, by extension, I always say Norway and Iceland, which are part of the economic zone, I would say that if you look at the territory already, we are in the Arctic. And this is not a dogmatic question. It means concretely that the very strict legislations that we have apply as well to the whole European territory, and also to Iceland and Norway. They have adopted our legislation as well, so that we have very strict and high norms, for example, in drilling, in environmental protection, apply to the whole European Union, including the European Arctic. The second reason why it's so important is what's happening in the Arctic affects the whole of the European Union. I will give some examples on climate change, which is the best well known, but also the European Union has a footprint in the European Arctic. We have a lot of products coming from the Arctic are imported in the European Union. For example, 24% of fish comes from mainly Norway, but the Norwegian Arctic. 2/3 of gas, LNG, that we import come from the European Arctic, comes from Norway and Russia. We have a lot of investments in the Arctic, and not only from Nordic states. I had the occasion to visit an industrial park in the Norwegian Arctic, where you have the biggest company is a Spanish steel company, which is recycling steel and applying all the conditions of circular economy. And then you have an increased tourism. So we have, I would say, also a footprint, and a lot of activities of the European Union affect the Arctic and vice versa. And the third reason why it's such important and why there is an increased interest globally in the Arctic is because of the warming up of the Arctic is having economic and geopolitical implications, which has a direct impact on the external and internal policies of the European Union. A few words about European Arctic policy as it stands now, plus our engagement. I always start by saying that it's very important to put our EU Arctic policy into the right context. And the right context is to refer to the European Union global strategy, Youth Global Foreign and Security Strategy of 2016, which explicitly mentions that the European Union has strategic interest that the Arctic remains an area of low tension based on constructive cooperation, including, it says, on the solid political and security cooperation. So our objective to have the Arctic remaining an area of low tension is extremely important. Our Arctic policy, we have an Arctic policy, the first one dated in 2008, the latest one 2016, which is an integrated EU policy towards the Arctic. It might not be a perfect policy. Some even contest that it is a policy, but it's something which is in working process. It's comprehensive, I would say. It's solid, and it's achieving quite a lot. I want to illustrate this based to give you some examples based on the three pillars of our policy. The first pillar is counteracting climate change and safeguard the fragile Arctic environment. The second one is promote sustainable development, and the third one is to promote international cooperation. On the first pillar, the effects of climate change in the Arctic and beyond are simply dramatic. And I know that people here present who know the situation know that it's really it's a very serious situation which causes major problems for the people living for the Arctic region itself, the people living in the Arctic. But also it's going beyond the Arctic. The Arctic is warming up 2 to 3 times quicker than the rest of the world. By the melting of the sea ice, this has an effect on 25% of global warming. So we are all, the world is warming up because the Arctic is warming up. It has also an effect on the land ice. Land ice are glaciers, which are mainly in Greenland. Greenland is 6 times the size of Germany, and it's covered by a big part by glaciers. If all glaciers in Greenland would melt, this would have an effect on the level, on raising the level of sea level globally with an average of 6 to 7 meters. So these are still for the future, but I mean it's dramatic. It's also causing the warming up, extreme weather conditions, and we had especially also this year major forest fires in Alaska, in Siberia, northern Sweden, a lot of flooding, everything. And therefore, the European Union is focusing a lot on addressing climate change. It does it, I would say, on a global level with Paris, and we have also specific programs. We mainly address it with major EU Arctic research programs that we have. But also we are addressing trying to protect the fragile Arctic environment. There is a lot of pollution in the Arctic, not caused by the 4 million people living there, but for example, the highest level of microplastics in all oceans is in the Arctic Ocean. This is stemming from plastic dumped elsewhere, and particularly I would say in the Asian, and therefore the European Union this year has a program of 9 million euros to address plastic in cooperation with the Asian countries. So tackling climate change, protecting the fragile environment. The second pillar of our policy is promoting sustainable development in and around the Arctic. To have no economic development in the Arctic is no option, but it has to be done in a sustainable way, given its impact on the fragile Arctic environment. And here for the European Union, it's extremely important to have a good balance between, at the one side, to have an economic development, and at the same time to have do it to protect the environment, so to do it in a sustainable way. And here we do this, promote sustainable development in and around the Arctic, based also on international cooperation. We have a lot of inter-regional cooperation. I'm sure that my colleague here in the panel will give some concrete examples. And whereby we have a focus on supporting the shift towards a low carbon economy. Just a few examples of what the European Union is doing. We have our European Union cohesion policies, whereby we support regional cooperation. We have investment plans for Europe, European regional cooperation programs, promoting close cooperation in the northern regions of Europe for a total amount over the last years of 1.3 billion euros. And as I said, we also do quite a lot with European research and innovation programs, with a focus also on cold, for example, cold climate technologies, which also promote sustainable energy development. The third pillar of the EU's Arctic policy is enhancing international cooperation. International cooperation is in the DNA of the European Union. We are engaged in regional and international fora. For example, for climate change, we mainly work through the UN system, but you have specific Arctic fora like the Arctic Council. The Arctic Council is the main body, I would say, the forum regarding Arctic cooperation, where you have 8 Arctic states and members, plus the permanent participants, which are the indigenous people representatives and observers. The European Union is a de facto observer. We are not a formal observer, which has been first due to objection by Canada. When Canada lifted its objection, it's now blocked by Russia. But this does not prevent us being, in the first place, we are treated the same way as the other observers. And secondly, we are active as European Union in the working groups we are as active as observers are allowed to be active in the Arctic Council, and we, for example, are co-financing some projects related to black carbon in the Arctic. Bilateral cooperation is absolutely key. It's explicitly mentioned in our Arctic policy that we want to cooperate with Arctic states, with all Arctic states. We work well with Russia, although we have some clause in the relationship with Russia. We work well with Russia on the Arctic file, particularly with our Northern Dimension policy and in the Barents Euro-Arctic cooperation policy, where we have very concrete cooperation project with Russia, also stimulating people-to-people contact, a lot of environmental projects addressing nuclear waste in the Russian Arctic. So we're doing quite a lot. And also with non-Arctic states. And this is, and Andreas, now we are used to being in many conferences on the Arctic, and one topic always comes up, is the increased role of China on the Arctic. Now, we engage as the European Union also with China. China says, and that's why I said in the beginning we are in the Arctic, China says it's a nearby Arctic, and we consider that it's important to engage also with China, because first it's important to have that cooperation because we need the cooperation of China to tackle, for example, climate change. And secondly, also we need the cooperation to engage and to ensure that international law is respected. And here we have a policy to be inclusive, to engage with countries that take an interest in the Arctic, without being naive, and I can give some more explanation on that maybe in the discussion. Also, inclusiveness for the European Union means to engage very actively with people in and of the Arctic. We have, and I think we are one of the few ones in our Arctic policy explicitly, we have an annual dialogue with the indigenous peoples of the Arctic. It took place in Umeå in Sweden in October. And we have also an EU stakeholders forum, which also took place in Umeå. And we have been involving the Arctic stakeholders very, very much in internal EU Arctic policy assessment report. We have been, I will say a few words about that. We have made an internal report where we have asked our stakeholders where should the new or revised EU Arctic policy focus on. And so we had a full major conference with a very interesting report. So these, I would say, the 3 pillars: climate change and environmental protection, sustainable development, and international cooperation. Now, what about the future? The first question is an update or revision of the EU Arctic policy needed? My response has been, even before you heard these recent voices that it's needed, I said, yes, it's needed. Not because the current policy is not a good one, but because all these developments which have been taking place recently are so going rapidly that we need to adapt our policy. We need to adapt it for mainly to take into account geoeconomic and geopolitical and security implications of the warming up of the Arctic. But there are certainly, even if we will have a new Arctic policy, to my mind, I'm not Madame Soleil, but to my mind, some issues will not change. The focus will remain of future EU Arctic policy on climate change. And there we have the new EU leadership, which probably on the 1st of December now will start, with President-elect Mrs. von der Leyen, who has very clearly said that climate change will be a key priority for the new EU leadership. And although they don't mention nowhere until now the word Arctic, I wrote to Mrs. von der Leyen about it, but I didn't get an answer, I think you cannot speak about addressing climate change without speaking about the Arctic. Also, our focus on sustainable development will remain, and international cooperation will remain. But it needs to be completed, I would say, mainly for three new elements to take into account. The geo-economic implication of the warming up of the Arctic, which to my mind affect a lot of internal EU Arctic policies, and it will have to be reflected in all the EU internal policies. I give you three brief examples: energy sector, mining sector, and shipping. Because of the warming up of the Arctic, there are the natural resources which are in the Arctic region, which are extremely rich. They're becoming more accessible. One example is LNG. The LNG sector in the Russian Arctic, they started in the Yamal. Can you show, Andreas, where the Yamal is on the map? No, it's lower. It's lower. Yeah.
Point anywhere,
Yeah.
nobody will know.
Yeah, that's true.
Just
Yeah.
be forceful.
Yeah, it's and there in December 2017, the first LNG Yamal plant opened in the Russian Arctic. December 2017. One of the first tankers which left the Yamal, they went to Zeebrugge, which is in Belgium. Zeebrugge is the biggest LNG port of Europe, and because of this Yamal 1 in Russian Siberia, Russia this year will become the 5th biggest LNG producer in the world. Russia is planning a Yamal 2 and probably will be the Yamal 3, 4, and 5 in future. And you know that energy is a very geopolitical issue, is extremely important for Europe, given also our energy dependency, energy security issues. And we have an interest as European Union to follow these developments because it will impact, I would say, the global energy sector, and also because it remains our objective for the European Union to promote green renewable energy sources. Second example of geo-economic implications of the warming up of the Arctic is the mining sector. The mining sector is extremely important. Europe consumes about 20% of minerals in the world. There are more than 90% of minerals and also rare earth minerals which are essential for new technologies, for electrical cars, for iPhones. They are imported mainly from China, whereas we have abundance of these minerals in the European Arctic, where we have import for the moment, only 3% comes from it. So we have an interest as European Union to stimulate, to have import of these essential minerals from the European Arctic. First reason because we want to reduce our import dependency, and secondly, because we know if we have these minerals from the European Arctic, it's done in a sustainable way. Third example of geo-economic implication, shipping industry. Because of the warming up, the shipping lanes are becoming more accessible, and particularly we are following the developments along the Northern Sea route. The Northern Sea route is going on I would say, if you say from northern Norway, it going through the whole Russian coast, where there are major developments taking place. Shipping is increasing. There are many discussions and doubts about, in future, the real economic viability of shipping along the Northern Sea route as concerned container shipping. I don't want to go into details, but the conditions are not there for the moment. For container shipping, you need to have huge ships, but also on-time delivery, and that you cannot guarantee by having shipping in the Arctic waters, and there are many other reasons. But I was just reading today in the High North news that Rosatom is a big Russian state company, is investing 7 billion in Arctic shipping to compete with the Suez Canal. And they are investing 7 billion in container shipping, which even the article says it's very unlikely, but they are doing it. But a fact is that despite it might not be economic viable for container shipping in the near future, a fact is that shipping is increasing. It has been reaching quite high levels it has been reached 30 millions of tons in 2019. No, it doesn't ring a bell for me, but I mean, it seems it's a lot. Europe has again an interest in following these developments because European member states have the biggest fleet in the world. We have our shipping sector plays a major role in connecting Europe with trading partners. And again, we are promoting sustainable shipping. Sustainable shipping we are doing to improve the environmental performance of maritime shipping. Heavy oil in general, wherever shipping is taking place, is very bad for the environment. It would be a catastrophe. It is a catastrophe in case there would be an accident in the Arctic. So we are also doing efforts. We have an interest in sustainable shipping. So geoeconomic implications are important. And then the step to geopolitics is extremely small. And I would say this is the most volatile area of developments taking place are geopolitics. You have Russia. Russia is, the Arctic is key to Russia's national security and economy. Russians are increasing their military presence in the Russian Arctic. China, as I said, a near Arctic state, being extremely active and engaged. And the US, I said, is wakening up, mainly because the increased activities of China and Russia. And we have those who have been following the discussions at the Arctic Council Ministerial had a very aggressive speech, aggressive toward China and Russia, of US State Secretary Pompeo. And then you all know the interest of President Trump in Greenland. So it is a volatile area, and we also believe that it will be needed in the new policy that the Arctic should be taken into account in our relations, external relations with Arctic and non-Arctic states. And the third reason, final reason why an update is necessary is to take into account the security implications. The security implications are important. The Arctic is considered as one of the most secure areas, regions in the world, and it's correct that they have managed to put the accent on cooperation instead of confrontation. It's known as the Arctic spirit. But an increased economic activity, which might also mean increased national competition, disputes, and even conflicts, cannot be excluded. The recent developments have indicated that that politics have an impact on the Arctic. And I always quote what a former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Finland said: you cannot put a do not disturb sign upon the Arctic. And to our mind, the biggest risk of security is the spillover of external extra-Arctic conflicts into the Arctic itself. The European Union for the moment is mainly focused on safety and soft security and is explicitly dealing with the Arctic in the EU's maritime security strategy and concrete actions that it's be doing. But there is an expectation that also the European Union should intensify its security involvement in the Arctic. And speaking of security, including hard security, I refer to not only the position it's underscored by the current Finnish EU presidency, but also Germany published a new Arctic policy in August and explicitly calls upon the EU and NATO to intensify their involvement on security policies and the Arctic. So I think this will have to be addressed, despite the fact that our global strategy already says now we need to have a solid cooperation on political and security issues. So in conclusions, the Arctic is more than polar bears on ice. It's local and it's global. And we are already an important Arctic actor, whereby we want to focus our objective to have a safe, a secure, a stable, prosperous, sustainable Arctic, because we believe it's not only in the interest of the Arctic and its people, but also the interest of the whole European Union and the interest of the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much.